Hey everyone, here it is, another exciting episode of Positively Trek. I'm one of your hosts, Dan Gunther, and with me, of course, is Bruce Gibson. Bruce, how are you on this lovely Saturday morning we find ourselves recording this episode?
I am doing just fine. You know, I got up this morning and I made breakfast for me and for my wife. Not for my kids. I let them do their own thing because they like to do their own thing. But yeah, I'm doing well. And it's good to hear that this is yet another exciting episode of Positively Trek.
Well, I like to think so. You know, I'm always excited to record it. So my morning was spent basically jumping out of bed and rushing to get down here to prepare for the episode because we're in different time zones. So it's a little earlier for me here than it is for you. But yeah, definitely fun to record another episode of this really fun project that we've been doing.
Yes. So what are we going to talk about this morning? We're not going to talk about what we had for breakfast.
No, I don't think so, because I actually haven't had breakfast yet, and I'm extremely jealous. But no, there's actually a surprising amount of news that's come out this week. So some good, some bad, some, interesting stories. So we'll start out with, first of all, there's a new Star Trek novel, and it was actually released last week. And that is the Kelvin Timeline Star Trek novel, The Unsettling Stars by Alan Dean Foster. So this is another new novel to sink your teeth into, but it's unique in that it's the first adult novel, non-young adult novel set in the Kelvin Timeline. So the history of this novel is kind of interesting because it was slated for release about 10 years ago, a full decade ago now, and was only now released because of contract negotiations stuff. They weren't going to release the Kelvin Timeline novels. There were 4 of them. They were all kind of shelved, and now we're finally getting to see one of them.
You said this episode was going to be exciting. Well, I'm excited about this novel, and, well, I have mixed thoughts on it. So one is that, every time I go see a Star Trek movie, I'm always thinking about, wow, there could be a novel about that, or I'd like to see that character maybe spun off into a novel or a comic or whatever. And so when I saw Star Trek 09, I was like, this is great. We could get novels about the Kelvin timeline, like what happened between the time of the Kelvin and the time we saw Kirk going into the Academy, like what happened in the Federation and Starfleet and that sort of thing that are different than this timeline. So I'm hoping that we get books that fill that out. I haven't read it yet, but this book is after that movie, that first movie, so it's another adventure with these characters. So I'm excited to read about that, but I also would like to get some books that explore other aspects of this different timeline. So I'm hoping we get that at some point. We did get comics, but again, it focused more on the crew. We got some things that focused on Vulcan and other things, but I really looking forward to reading this one. And then there's another one coming out later this year. I think it's by David Mack. And that was one of the original ones, too, from 10 years ago that never got published. So after a decade, we're finally getting these books.
Yeah, and I think that novel is called More Beautiful Than Death, and that will be coming in a few months as well. So I know for one thing, the David Mack novel is one that he has gone on the record as saying that he's very proud of, and was pretty sad that nobody was able to read it for a while. So I'm really glad that's finally going to get into the hands of the public.
Yeah, and now this book, the Unsettling Stars novel, written by Alan Dean Foster, he has agreed to come on Literary Treks. So he'll be on episode, I think, 302, which will drop on May 10th. So we will be interviewing the author of that book. And Alan Dean Foster has a rich history with Star Trek. He wrote the Star Trek log books that were based on the animated series in the 70s, and also was one of the creators behind the story, if not the story writer for the motion picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm very excited to talk to him. Someone with a very rich history with Star Trek, not just with this recent novel, but a long history going back many years that I'm really excited to learn more about.
Yeah, me too.
So next up, we have a kind of unfortunate news story, and this is out of San Diego. San Diego Comic-Con 2020 has been canceled due to the coronavirus, COVID-19. And this is kind of not unexpected news. We kind of saw this coming, but the resulting lockdown of the coronavirus pandemic has led to the canceling of San Diego Comic-Con for the first time in its 50-year history. So, this is pretty major. SDCC was somewhere where a lot of different shows, a lot of different films and properties made announcements and had panels and that sort of thing. So, there was an expectation, of course, that Star Trek was going to once again have a large showing at San Diego Comic-Con, which it has had in the last few years. So, if, for example, there were going to be any new shows announced, Pike series, it might have been at San Diego Comic-Con, but that is not going to be happening. It's pretty much everything in Hollywood is just had a big pause button pushed on it lately, which is really unfortunate.
I wasn't planning to go to San Diego Comic-Con. I haven't been. Maybe one day I'll go. So for me, I'm just, I'm not really all that disappointed because I wasn't going anyway. And if there's any big news to announce, they don't need to do it at this venue. They can do it at any time. So if they want to announce any kind of new series or movies or whatever, they can do that anywhere. They don't have to do it at this event. But I feel bad for those people who are planning to attend. But yeah, it's unfortunate. But, there's always next year. You can go next year.
Yeah, no, it is unfortunate. I've never been myself either, but I enjoy the live tweets from the events and that sort of thing. And yeah, for the people who like to go, it's definitely a bummer. Apparently, the San Diego Convention Center has been repurposed as a homeless shelter during the pandemic. So, that space is being put to good use, if not for Comic-Con. And I got to say, this use is probably more beneficial at the moment than a large Comic-Con that would feature lots of people in close contact with each other would be at this time. So a very prudent decision. Now, I guess all that kind of remains is to see is what happens with Star Trek Las Vegas and Star Wars Celebration. Are those still going to go ahead? My money's kind of on probably no at this point. I think those events will probably be canceled as well, but we don't know that for sure yet. But San Diego Comic-Con, first time in 50 years, kind of a big deal there. That's unfortunate.
Wait, when they say first time in 50 years, does that mean this is its 50th anniversary?
That's a good question. So in the statement on the official site, Comic-Con International stated that for the first time in its 50-year history, there will be no Comic-Con held in San Diego. So yeah, I don't know. Is that exactly 50 years or are they rounding?
Because if it was the 50th anniversary, that's really like, hey, it's our 50 years. Oh, we're going to cancel.
Yeah, that's crazy. Wow. So another news story that recently is gaining attention is LeVar Burton confirming discussions to appear in Star Trek Picard. And this has kind of hit the news recently. He had an interview on Entertainment Tonight. And of course, he was interviewed from home by remote because, he's responsible like the rest of us and he's staying at home, doesn't need to be out. But he was asked if there was a potential for him to return to the role of Geordi LaForge on Star Trek Picard. And apparently he was a little cagey at first, didn't want to get himself into trouble, of course, but he did hint more directly. So he says, and I quote, "I think it is reasonable to assume that those people are still a part of Picard's life. Sure, what the hell? Yeah, absolutely." So, interesting. It looks like we might see Geordi LaForge. And then he also dropped this tidbit. He said, "You will see us all. Probably not all at the same time, although never say never." So it sounds like we're getting probably more cameos, more appearances by the classic TNG crew in season 2 and beyond of Picard. And, it's interesting to hear some of these stars come out and say this stuff and be a little bit beating around the bush, but still definitely dropping some big hints there.
Yeah, this isn't any big surprise to me. I'm sure they're always kicking around the idea that they're going to bring some of these cast members back, and it wouldn't even surprise me that these actors talk to Patrick Stewart, since they're a close group, and say, hey, you think there's any chance? Because they're, they want to do it because they enjoy it, but also, it's work, and Patrick's like, oh, I'm sure, there's there's been some talk. I'll let you know. You know, so I mean, this doesn't surprise me. I think the one character and the one actor that I would really like to hear from is related to Beverly Crusher, because we've heard no indication about this character in this timeline. We know that Geordi is still around because he was mentioned and Worf was mentioned in one of the episodes, and we know Geordi was at the Mars shipyard, you know. So, I mean, we know that they're around. We have heard no indication of Dr. Crusher.
Yeah, and that's like you, kind of the one character that I'm most curious about, partially because we've heard absolutely nothing, probably the only character who's not had any kind of hints or indications, but also because that character has such an impact on Picard's life and was so important to Picard in TNG in the films. So, yeah, wherefore art thou, Beverly? I want her in Picard, or at least some sort of indication that it's been considered. I don't know.
I mean, I'm sure it's been considered. I mean, I feel like they're holding it off for a reason, you know, because I honestly, of all the characters, she's the one I'm probably the most interested in because of what you just said. He had a more intimate relationship with her. So what happened to that relationship? We've seen in All Good Things that they were married. We've seen in the novels them being married. And now we're seeing this, which is a different timeline to all those. And it's like, so what happened to those two characters together? And there's been no indication. So it's just piqued my interest of like, is she even still alive? Did they ever get married? Or did they go separate ways? It's like, I'd like to know that.
Well, I mean, I think the only person who can give us some indication on that would be the character herself. So here's hoping we actually get to see her at some point, or get a name drop at least or something. But speaking of characters and name drops, and this is a horrible segue, so I'm going to say Garrett Wang and Robert Duncan McNeill have taken their cue from us and decided to start a podcast. So Garrett Wang and Robert Duncan McNeill are launching a Star Trek Voyager rewatch podcast, and it's called the Delta Flyers, which I have to say I think is just a perfect name. That's excellent. And yeah, their timing couldn't be better, because this year Voyager is celebrating its 25th anniversary. And, you know, rewatch podcasts are kind of all the rage. They're a lot of fun. I've recently listened to the recently wrapped The West Wing Weekly, which was doing a rewatch of episodes of The West Wing all the way through its 7-year history. So in this one, they'll be watching all 7 seasons of Star Trek Voyager, and you can watch along and listen to this podcast with Tom Paris and Harry Kim talking about the show. So what do you think about this, Bruce? Is this a podcast you're going to subscribe to?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'll listen to it, and if I don't like it, I'll stop listening to it, but I have a feeling I'll like it. I've been trying to do a rewatch of Voyager, and I haven't been able to accomplish that. And no, it has nothing to do with, oh, well, you don't like Voyager that much, I guess. It's not that. I try to do it with the other series, too. What happens is when I start to do a rewatch of these shows or these series, I all of a sudden want to see another episode because it's something we're discussing in a novel and literary tracks or on our live show or something. And then I jump ahead to that, and then I watch the next episode out of that, and now I'm like, okay, well, now I'm out of order, and then I stop doing my rewatch because I started jumping around. This will at least keep me on track, because I'm going to watch each episode with them. I mean, not physically in the room with them, of course, but as they release each podcast episode, that will prompt me to watch that episode of Voyager. So I'm excited to listen to this for that reason, to keep me on track of a rewatch, but also because they worked on the show. Whether they're the actors or the people behind the scenes or writers, I would like any podcast that involves anybody who worked on the show, because they're bringing something more to it than just their review of it, a fan review. They're coming in from the perspective of being there, and they can give us some anecdotes to what happened on the set at that time. So I'm really excited to hear this. And they're two people that have great personalities and should be a lot of fun.
Definitely, yeah. They're a lot of fun to listen to talk at conventions and that sort of thing. When I was listening to the West Wing Weekly, one thing they frequently did was bring on other actors and producers and people who had been on the show. So I'm wondering if there are plans to do that as well. Maybe use some of their connections, bring Robert Beltran or Kate Mulgrew or any of the other actors and producers behind the scenes onto the show to talk about it. I think that would be really cool. But regardless, even just hearing these two talk about these older episodes of Voyager as they make their way through the 7 seasons is going to be a lot of fun. Now, the first episode is going to drop in early May, according to the pair. And if you want more details, you can find them on Twitter at the Delta Flyers and get updates as to how that project is coming along there. So very excited, and I'm wishing them well on their podcast journey. Well, a final news story I want to talk about is kind of one that's been making buzz lately. Rosario Dawson recently spoke to Variety's After Show about a number of things to do with her career. Now, Rosario Dawson is an actor who you may know from the Netflix Marvel television shows. She's been on there, and she's kind of a prolific Hollywood actor. She's had a lot of roles here and there, but she's also a self-professed huge Star Trek fan. And over the years, she's, raised her hand when the subject of guesting on Star Trek has come up. She's, petitioned to be in the J.J. Abrams movies. She's long wanted to be a part of the franchise. And another thing that she's recently made news for is the rumor of the potential casting of her in The Mandalorian as a fan favorite character. Spoilers if you're avoiding Star Wars, interesting spoilers, but apparently she's been cast as Ahsoka Tano in season 2 of The Mandalorian. Not confirmed, but definitely an interesting rumor that's been going around. But in this interview, she also brought up the subject of Star Trek because, as I said, she's been long a huge Star Trek fan. She's professed an interest in playing Q on Star Trek Picard and or Star Trek Discovery, saying, I just want to be on with Jean-Luc Picard. She's very excited about Star Trek, wants to be in the series. And she knows her Star Trek because this is her quote here. She says, my dad said I should be Q because male Q, female Q, young Q, they are all just Q. It's the Q continuum. It would be great. So, she's a Star Trek fan. She knows that when she says Q, she doesn't just mean the Q that's played by John Delancey. They're all called Q. I love that little bit of Star Trek knowledge she dropped there.
Yeah, it really feels like she's on a campaign to get jobs. Because I'm on Star Wars Report. We cover Star Wars stuff, and we've been just talking about her, like you said, appearing on The Mandalorian, and now here I am on the Star Trek podcast. We're talking about her in Star Trek. I'm like, and everything's rumors, and I'm like, okay, What are we doing here? But hey, that's fine. I mean, if she wants to play Q, fine. I mean, I don't really have an opinion either way. I mean, my own real opinion is I really don't want to say I don't want Q, but I just don't like going back to the well all the time. And I don't want Q to be in something just to have Q into something. But if we had Q in Picard, I'd really like to see John Delancey,
I would love to see John Delancey reprise that role again. And, they don't even need to de-age him, and, they could have some reason for him to show up as his older self. I don't need to have everything be absolutely perfect. He's Q. He has reasons for doing whatever he wants to do. That's fine.
I want them to de-age him like they did with Data. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to whatever. But yeah, if she's that big of a fan, I ask her, as we're sitting here now, I'm asking her to come on the show and let's discuss this. Let's figure out, what other roles you could play. So let us know.
That would be great. But yeah, so Rosario Dawson in Star Trek, I think would be interesting. I don't know much about this actor besides the few roles that I've seen her in, other than the fact that, like I said, she's a big Star Trek fan and kind of a big name out there. So I thought it would be kind of fun in what we have left of this episode to talk a little bit about some of the bigger names that have made appearances in Star Trek over the years. And one thing I want to avoid, because I absolutely hate this, is when you get a video on YouTube or one of those list videos that say things like, 20 actors that you didn't know were in Star Trek. Well, excuse me, video. I knew they were in Star Trek, and I'm sure lots of other people knew they were in Star Trek too. So we're not going to talk down to people. We're just going to talk about some interesting people who have been in Star Trek over the years. And a lot of these are really well known, but there are a few that definitely surprised me when I first learned about them. So a few that people have heard before, and this one was no surprise to me, was Kirsten Dunst has appeared in Star Trek before as Hedril in the TNG episode Dark Page. And Dark Page is the episode where Lwaxana Troi comes on board the Enterprise, and she has kind of repressed memories of Troy's older sister who had died tragically when she was really young. And Kirsten Dunst played a young girl that reminded Lwaxana of this character.
Yeah, and this is, in her younger years. And I remember her being such a big deal of a child actor at that time. And she still is a big deal. And I remember my boss had a picture of himself with her at this age in his office, because we did some promotion with, what movie was she in? It was the movie, the vampire movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm assuming it's Interview with a Vampire.
Yes.
It was kind of her big breakout role.
Yeah, that was it. So we had like some promotion with them. And so there was, I don't remember. I wasn't at the event for whatever reason, but yeah, that's my memory of her at this age is that picture, because it was always sitting there on his desk.
Mm-hmm.
But she didn't have those ears like she has in this episode, which look really fake. Because I'm just looking at a picture right now with her wearing those ears. It just looks like a Halloween costume, a cheap thing that somebody just put on top of their ears. Are those even ears?
I think it was supposed to be like a larger brain thing because they were a very telepathic species. That was always kind of my assumption. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, they're just big, like weird looking. I don't know. But yeah.
Well, one actor who also appeared in The Next Generation who wasn't wearing a ton of makeup. She didn't play an alien. She played a human. This is Ashley Judd, who played Robin Leffler in 2 episodes of The Next Generation Darmok, and most famously in The Game, where she was kind of a bit of a flirtation love interest for Wesley Crusher, who was visiting the ship. So, Wesley Crusher got to flirt with Ashley Judd. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I was very jealous at the time.
Yes.
Yeah, she was one of my Star Trek crushes. I don't have many of them, but she was definitely one of them. We're about the same age, so yeah, she was right up my alley, I guess. But no, I really like this character too, because I like Leffler's Laws, and then we've seen her progress through the Star Trek New Frontier novels.
Yeah, she definitely became a larger character in the Litverse, which is pretty cool. So, yeah, it was kind of great reading those novels because you get to picture Ashley Judd in the role as well, which is, that's kind of a nice bonus.
And when I see her in movies, more recent movies, I always picture her. I always think that's Leffler if she was like in a Star Trek movie right now.
Well, yeah, so more Star Trek The Next Generation guest stars. Mick Fleetwood. This one is kind of known in fan circles, but you definitely would not recognize him. In the second season TNG episode Manhunt, he played an Antedian assassin, and he was basically one of those fish people that Worf said, "What a handsome race," when he looked at them. And they were, under a ton of makeup. He was planning to bomb this conference, and Lwaxana Troi discovered the plot. Mick Fleetwood, of course, from the band Fleetwood Mac. So I always thought that was kind of a neat little bit of cameo role for someone pretty cool.
It is, but I never understood it. I always thought this was the strangest cameo ever, because there's nothing for him to really do. He's just walking around. He's not really even acting, and you don't even know it's him. It's like if someone said, "Hey, Bruce, I want to put you in an episode of Star Trek," I'd be really excited. If they put that fish costume on me, I'm like, well, you might as well make me a lamp. You could have me stay in the corner, put a lampshade on me. I'm not really even doing anything. I'm not even being seen. So that's a strange one to me.
Mm-hmm. I always just assumed he really wanted to be on Star Trek and didn't care how he was on Star Trek. There was just, it's like, I want to be on Star Trek. I want to meet Patrick Stewart or something. I don't know.
But then, it's probably hot in that thing too. Ugh.
Oh man. Yeah. I personally would not want to be under a huge costume like that. No, I'm hoping those sets are nicely air conditioned, but I don't know.
I would hope so.
Well, another one from TNG, favorite actor of mine, Famke Janssen, who played Kamala in The Perfect Mate. Now, Famke Janssen, you may know her from the X-Men films. She played Jean Grey, as well as, numerous roles in Hollywood over the years. I love Famke Janssen, and the fact that she had this role in TNG. Not my favorite episode. I'm not a huge fan of the episode, but her performance, I think, is really good in this one as well.
Yeah, I forgot that she was in this until we started going. I was like, oh, that's right. Yeah, because I think of her as on X-Men.
She gets to... It's kind of cool because I never make the connection that, of course, in both of these, she's acting alongside Patrick Stewart. So It's kind of cool that there's this long relationship there. When she plays Jean Grey in the X-Men, she had worked with Patrick Stewart years before that, which is kind of cool.
Never thought about it until we're talking about it today.
Well, one more from TNG, and it's kind of funny. TNG seemed to like the big name, beautiful Hollywood starlets because Terry Hatcher also appeared in Star Trek The Next Generation in a lot of people's favorite episode, and I say that sarcastically, The Outrageous Okana. She played the transporter chief, Robinson, who Thadian Okana flirts with and does more with later in the episode as well. So Terry Hatcher, you may know, I think most famously, I know her as Lois Lane from Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, but also numerous roles that you might have seen her in over the years as well.
I have always been a big Superman fan, but I never really could get into that series of Lois and Clark. And I've been wanting to watch it again, but I can't find it anywhere unless I buy DVDs or something. But I watched her more often in Desperate Housewives.
Right. Yeah, that was her other big role.
So that was a very popular show. And we watched that. My wife and I watched that for every season. So we've seen every episode of that. I also think of her from an episode of Seinfeld because I'm a big Seinfeld fan. So she was also in that. So yeah, Terry Hatcher's been around different things. So this was very much early in her career.
There's one in particular that I wanted to talk about because this one was genuinely a surprise to me when I found this out. Other people, they're recognizable. I've seen them. Mick Fleetwood, obviously not so much, but others, you see them and you see them years later in other roles and you're like, oh, I remember them on Star Trek. But this one kind of blew my mind. Jeffrey Dean Morgan, who's kind of big in Hollywood at the moment, has a good career going. Probably most famous recently for playing Negan in The Walking Dead. Jeffrey Dean Morgan actually guest starred on an episode of Enterprise in the 3rd season. In the episode Carpenter Street, he played a Xindi named Damron. And you definitely cannot be blamed for not recognizing him because he's under all that Xindi makeup, the Xindi reptilian. Yeah, this was a surprise to me. I had no idea he was in Star Trek until years later.
Yeah, I didn't know that until you were telling me before the show. So that is a big surprise here.
Yeah, and kind of unfortunate story for him. So in a 2012 interview with Entertainment Weekly, he told them that he only took the role of Damron because he needed some money to pay his bills. And he was recalling the experience of playing a Xindi reptilian as being very unpleasant. He said that he had to stick straws in his nose to breathe, was claustrophobic the entire time, and that he couldn't eat. And he said in this interview he also remembered going home in tears and claimed that he nearly quit acting because of his experience on Star Trek Enterprise. So, man, that's really sad to learn that, we almost didn't have Negan and, this wonderful career of Jeffrey Dean Morgan's right now because of Star Trek Enterprise.
They could have just ruined it for all of us. But I don't blame him, though, because as, an amateur actor guy who's done some acting, whatever, but yeah, I'm not like an actor, but I've done acting. But as much as I love Star Trek, I really don't think I would want to do Star Trek for those kind of reasons. And the only thing I would like to do is like maybe a 1 episode thing or a movie where I'm not in a costume of an alien with makeup. And I do not want to sit in a chair for several hours, and I don't want to breathe through straws, and I don't want to have to drink shakes because I can't eat. I don't want to be uncomfortable is my point. And, the long hours of a series, these poor people work, 14, 16, 18 hours a day, whatever it is. And it sounds miserable to me. Mm-hmm. I love Star Trek, but my gosh, I could not handle that work. I would not be happy.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember, kind of speaking of stars who have been on Star Trek or wanted to be on Star Trek, I was reading the background information for Deep Space Nine, and apparently Frank Sinatra Jr. had approached them and saying that he wanted to be on the show in some capacity. So they created the character that came to be known as Vic Fontaine. And that was originally supposed to be Frank Sinatra Jr. And they presented the idea of the character to him. And he said, no, I want to be like an alien. I don't want to be I don't want to be me. So they went with James Darren, but there's a guy that wanted to be under all that makeup and stuff. So that's kind of interesting.
I would want to be like a Christian Slater, just have one brief scene in a Starfleet uniform and just say I've done it and I'm in Star Trek. That's it. When he was in Undiscovered Countries, just something simple like that.
Definitely, yeah. Well, like I said, there are so many more that have been in Star Trek. There's, of course, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson has been in Star Trek before. Iggy Pop, Sarah Silverman.
She was on Saturday Night Live. Big fan.
Absolutely. Definitely agree. I'm going to throw it out there to the listeners. Tweet to us at Positively Trek. Who is your favorite big name guest star, or maybe even not a big name, just a guest star that you really enjoyed seeing on Star Trek? Let us know at Positively Trek on Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Kertrats, KERTRATS. And Bruce?
You can find me on Twitter at Admiral_Rex.
Well, thank you guys all so much for listening to another episode of Positively Trek. We'll see you in a week. Stay safe, stay sane, and have a great week.
See you around.